Hey everybody, today's tip has to do with how to talk to journalists. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and there's a lot of different areas that I could dive down deeper into with regard to talking to journalists and how important that is and all the different factors around it. I think underlying the whole discussion is that it's not always easy to do that. And from both sides, it's not always easy for a person who wants to pitch or talk about their company to talk to a journalist, and it's not easy for a journalist to always be pitched to. So there are ways to make the whole process easier. So I'll just dive down into one particular point that I think is important today. Since there's obviously so many different things that you can talk about, I think it's important to just sort of break it down into one thing once in a while on different updates. So today's would be about knowing the right time and place to actually talk to a journalist. And there's no one right time and place to talk to a journalist, but there are plenty of times and places that are not okay. And so I will make that point today by through a story. Recently, I went to New York. I do that once a year. I tend to do it once a year for business. Sometimes it's more, but usually it's once a year. And usually I coincide it with a conference that's happening. And I'm able to hang out with friends. I'm able to go visit my editors at the different magazines I write for, that kind of thing. And so you sort of turn it into an all-in-one business slash pleasure slash, meet up with colleagues and friends and old buddies type trip, and that usually happens once a year. And this year it was at Affiliate Summit East, which was held at the Marriott Marquis, which is this big extravagant hotel right in the middle of Times Square, and it's just bonkers. It was kind of a mess. There was a lot of people there, probably 500,000 tourists, like more than the population of a large city in tourists in Midtown Manhattan. From the area that reaches like the Trump Tower to Central Park to like the West Side where Colbert does his show and some other things like that. So yeah, you have a million tourists there, and it's kind of crazy, and it's fun, but it's also tiring. Anyway, so I get there this time around. So here's the story. I get there this time around to make sure that I'm signed up for Affiliate Summit East, and turns out I'm not signed up or registered properly. I thought I was. I wasn't. There was a miscommunication. So I wait in line. I get to the desk where a nice lady's behind the counter, and she can't find my name. So she knows that I'm a press person. So she says, go to the press thing, which is across the hall. So I go all the way across the hall, wait in another line, finally get to the person I want to talk to. She's looking for my name up in a database. She asked me where I'm, which outlet I write for. I say Entrepreneur. And then, of course, there's a startup founder with his co-founder standing in the slot next to us, dealing with somebody else behind the counter talking about something else. And he hears, "Oh, Entrepreneur. So you write for Entrepreneur?" he says. And this is almost at the exact same time, like literally right after that the woman behind the counter had asked me another question. I forget what. And so I was attempting to answer her when this startup founder sort of loudly in my face said, "Oh, you write for Entrepreneur?" And it was like, it wasn't easy. So I had to ask her to repeat herself. She did. I answered. I turned to him and I said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" And he, already looking somewhat disappointed or annoyed that he would have to repeat himself, asked me, "So you write for Entrepreneur?" I said, "Yes, I do write for Entrepreneur." And he said, "What are you covering here today at the conference?" And she had just started to ask me another question and was looking at him kind of annoyed. Like, could you please not do that? Trying to figure out his registration situation. So I said, hold on just 1 second. I'm not even entirely sure I'm going to be able to cover anybody at this conference because my registration situation isn't finalized yet. And so he sort of in a huff turned away. And then through a series of questions with the woman, I was able to mostly figure out what the situation was, and I had to move to a different computer to type in my information again and some other things like that. Well, the guy came up to me and started to pitch his company. And say, well, and even though he could see that I was doing something, he still started to tell me something about the story of his company. And I said, "You know what? Here's my name. Here's my card. Talk to me later." And he said, somewhat in a huff, "I'm sorry to have wasted your time." Something along those lines. I forget exactly what he said, but that was something like that. That was a frustrating situation. So put yourself, if you will, in my position. Let's say you are just arriving at a conference and your registration situation is not figured out yet. Someone overhears that you work for company XX, and they suddenly, as you're trying to figure out your registration situation, they suddenly start asking you questions, making it difficult for you to complete the task at hand. How do you feel? How does that feel? Do you enjoy that? Startup founders out there who need marketing help and who need press, how would that feel? So without warning and without real reason, I was suddenly like inundated by the personality of someone who needed to not have coffee that morning, apparently. It brings it all right back around to, is this the right place and the right time to be pitching your story to a journalist? Before you pitch, so there's a lot of tips I could give in this area. And the reason why I'm giving this particular tip at this particular time is because of the story of what happened at the conference in New York. Yeah, is this the right place and the right time to be pitching the story to the journalist? Extra credit for you if you actually realize that perhaps what maybe you should be doing is doing your homework on the journalist. That's something that we talked about in a prior update. Do your homework. Actually say, you know what, I know I can see you're really busy right now. Can I just get your name real quick? And then that way I can actually like go online and, or maybe even just can I get your email and I'll pitch you on the email. But what would be better even is I'll go online and I'll see what you actually write about. And I'll see if you actually cover what my company does. Homework is such a great cure-all for these when do I talk to journalists type discussions. So that's the tip for today. Be aware of your surroundings and know whether or not it's okay to actually be asking or pitching a journalist about your company or your story at that time. All right. Thanks so much, you guys. I hope that tip helped. In the future, I will have more stories and more tips around how you talk to journalists, how you pitch to journalists, what works and what doesn't. And so subscribe, if you can, to my channel here. And I will look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thanks a lot. See ya.